In this lecture, you'll be learning a few new techniques for modeling your shapes and using techniques that we've already learnt in order to create the first part of this cyborg, which you'll be encouraged to finish yourself. So to create my cyborg here, I can base it on my original Blockman here. So let's duplicate our original Blockman. So I'll come up to the collections up here, right click on it and duplicate collection. That gives me this Blockman 001. So I'll rename this Cyborg 2. It could just as well be a robot. I'll hide the original Blockman and start editing my Cyborg 2 model here. I'll go to front view, zoom in just a touch, and I want to resize it so it's much bigger. So we can move our 3D cursor to the center here. So I can shift right click or shift S, cursor to world origin, and then use my 3D cursor as the transform pivot point. Now when I select all these and scale them upwards to make them a big human, it will go around my 3D cursor. So take a moment to catch up with me, duplicate your Blockman collection and scale it up so it's nice and big compared to your other characters. Now my cyborg hasn't really got any hands, so I can delete the hands, select those, press delete, and I can make the forearms much bigger, so select them and scale them up. Oh, and I've left my transform pivot on my 3D cursor, so let's come up and turn that to medium point, which is the default. Scale that up, maybe to around about here, and we want to scale but not in the local Z axis, so shift Z twice, and we can scale it out like this, and move it downwards to somewhere around here, let's say. So catch up with me, delete the hands and make those forearms nice and big. Okay, so how do we make all these interesting modifications? Well, if I click on this model and go to edit mode, you can kind of see what I've done with this. And you can go a lot further than this and create all sort of intricate designs just by doing loop cuts and extrusions. So let's go back to our model over here. So tab into object mode, select our different object into edit mode, and let's move in on that. So I'll do something similar but a bit more random. So first I'll start with some loop cuts. So Control R, use the wheel of my mouse to increase that, and double left click to apply those, scale it up, and maybe something like this. Looks kind of interesting. So pause the video and quickly catch up with me with 2 loop cuts around the middle, scaled up slightly. Let's do a couple more, so Control R, use the wheel, and I've got loop cuts going all the way around then. Double left click to set those. And let's select these faces coming down here. And then E to extrude, pull that out, and we've got some sort of interesting arm just there. So once again, catch up with me, select those 3 faces and extrude them out slightly. Okay, so for the next bit, I'm going to press Control R to do a loop cut around the middle here, use my wheel to create 2, and double left click. And this time I want to select all the faces going around the middle there and bring them inwards. So in order to select those faces, obviously we need to be in face mode with 3, so that's face mode up here. And I can select a face loop, a loop of faces going around my object, and I can do that by holding down Alt and left clicking on one of the edges that goes across the edge loop, so this edge for example. And that selects all the way around my object, that entire face loop. So if I press Alt left click here, it will go around there, Alt left click here, it goes around there. So it's the edge going across the face loop, so that one just there. Incidentally, you can do this with edges as well, so if I go to edge mode with 2, I can press Alt left click and select edges going around, as you can see there. I'll go back to face mode with 3 and select that face loop there. And I want to press E to extrude and scale it inwards. And that's looking pretty interesting there. So take a moment to catch up with me, select a face loop with Alt left click, make sure of course you're in face mode, and then extrude and scale those faces inwards. Okay, so let's do a similar thing around the front here. So Control R, use the wheel of my mouse to create 2 loop cuts, and double left click. Now I think I'd like to create one that's quite thin. So I'm in edge mode at the moment up here. I can select this edge loop here and press GG to slide those edges along like this. So that's the edge slide command, GG, double tapping G. And I can bring that closer to the other one, maybe slightly off center, will look quite interesting. And let's select this face loop going around here. So go to faces, Alt left click on one of the edges going across to select that face loop. And this time if I press E to extrude then scale, it's a bit strange because in here you can see a bit of overlap happening as it scales it up. So this edge seems to sort of be overlapping the other one there. If I select this one and press period key, you can see this problem we're getting here, that it's overlapping itself. It's not really too bad and you wouldn't notice it too much. If you look at the other side, it doesn't look so bad, but it's not very good modeling. And if you want to add intricate details in here somewhere, then it can get very complicated. So I'm going to undo that. And there's another command that's very useful. Instead of just pressing E for extrude, I'll undo that. If I press Alt E, it gives me some extrude options. Now extrude faces along the normals is the one I want here. If I select that and then start extruding, can you see how it extrudes out? And it's doing a lot better job, not perfect, but a lot better job of extruding outwards and not overlapping itself, because it's following the normals of the face. That's the face direction as it points outwards. Now you can see these normals. If I go to the overlays up here and use that drop down, I can go to the normals here and click on the face normal just there. So display normals as lines, and you can see these blue lines sticking out from each face, and that tells you the direction. But basically it's fairly obvious which direction they go in. It's kind of just the way they're pointing. But you can see it's gone a little bit distorted in here, but it's much better than it was when we just did an extrude and scale. So I'll turn those overlays off by clicking on the overlays and ticking here. And I could tidy this up a little bit, so let's select these faces and press period key to zoom in on those. And we can just line them up a little bit better, maybe across there. We can move this one out, just this way slightly, and just line them up by eye to create a bit more of a tidy shape. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I think that's a lot better than it was. We would have to do the same on the other side, but to be honest it doesn't really look too bad. If we look at the other one, it looks quite good really. But you may need to do a bit of tidy up like I've done there if you want it to be really accurate. So pause the video and have a go at extruding out along the normals by using the command Alt-E. One more thing that you might find useful is the inset tool. So if I go to face mode with 3 and select this face for example, I can press I to inset, and that brings a face in like this, and I can then press E to extrude and pull the face out or inwards like this, and that can create an interesting look as well. So I'll choose another face and show you that once more. So I'm still in face mode, I'll select this one here. So I is the inset command, but if I press E then S, that actually does the same thing as the inset. So I is kind of a shortcut to pressing E then S straight away for the scale. And inset gives you slightly more options, which I'll talk about in a second. So I can left click to set it there and then E to extrude to pull it inwards or outwards, maybe outwards for this one. And there we've got this crazy looking weapon on their arms. So we could also have some at the bottom here, so I'll select these 3 faces at the bottom here and I'll press I for inset, and that keeps it all together, but I can actually press I again and that will inset the individual faces. You can see these commands in the text at the top of the viewport there, and if I left click we've got some extra commands here, so there's the individual, I can turn that on and off. As soon as I edit these though, much like adding the cylinder earlier, if I let's say extrude inwards like this, that will then change to the next command. So there's a few options there for creating interesting shapes like I've made on the Cyborg over here. Now you don't have to use all of them, test them out. It will probably go wrong and you'll probably have overlapping geometry, but it doesn't really matter too much on really blocky characters like this. So the errors that you might get inside here for extrusions don't really matter too much. So this is a good chance to really experiment doing extrusions, doing loop cuts, selecting face loops and insetting them. So it's worth trying out each of those tools. So your challenge then is to create a cyborg character like this. Not every single part has to be as complex as this, but make sure you've tried out the following. Obviously doing loop cuts and extrusions, selecting a face loop and extruding a face loop, and also using the inset tool and experimenting with that. So that concludes this lecture. What I would encourage you to do, once again, is to share your creations with the community so we can see what you've come up with and what funny characters and cyborgs you've come up with. I look forward to seeing your creations.